Isn't it the reality that many people back in the motherland will be left asking not only what's the point of the current Secretary of State for Wales, but what's the point of having a colonial secretary at all?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed with the tone the honourable member takes, and I would hope that he would recognise the fair funding settlement that we got for Wales, something the Labour Party ignored for 13 years, the Severn tolls announcement, the city and growth deals that we've got. The Swansea is a £1.3 billion scheme. The Cardiff scheme is the biggest in the UK, and I hope that that demonstrates the value a Secretary of State for Wales can bring.
Caroline Harris.
Mr. Speaker, electrification, we haven't had it. Tidal Lagoon, if the FT is to be believed, we're not going to have it. When is the Secretary of State going to start speaking up for the people of Wales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, no announcement has been made on the Tidal Lagoon because we're still looking at the numbers, and we're doing anything and everything possible to try to make this fit. But I would say that the Honourable Lady shouldn't want it to go ahead if it's not good value for money for the taxpayer. She will be well aware that Tata is an energy-intensive industry right next door to the proposed site for the Tidal Lagoon. I don't think she or any other member would want to increase energy prices that could put those jobs at risk.
Frank Davis.
Point, Mr. Speaker, will he point out to the Business Secretary that once nuclear energy commands 12% of global output, we'll run out of uranium in 10 years and the price will go up, and the price of fossil fuels will go up because we can't use 80% of it to fulfil our Paris Agreement, and the Lagoon price will go down. Will he point that out over 100 years rather than just sitting there doing nothing but crawl?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the honourable member mentioned the Ulva project, because that's a great demonstration where the government is prepared to look at the financial model and adjust it in order to make projects happen. This will be the biggest infrastructure project in Wales for well over 30 years. There are fantastic prospects that face us with that, and I hope that tidal and marine energy could offer the same, but we should only want a scheme if it's good value for money.
Mr. Speaker, when the people of Wales and the Welsh Labour Government can see the merit of the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon to the extent that they are prepared to invest more than £200 million in order to achieve the benefits in jobs, in growth and in cheap, clean, renewable power, why is it that the Secretary of State's UK Tory government will not even go as far as to sign the same deal that it has already concluded with French and Chinese governments to pay £92.5 per megawatt hour for nuclear electricity that will be produced at Hinkley C for the next 35 years?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an important point, because she talks about projects that are value for money, and of course 9250 was rightly highlighted as extremely expensive at the time, and we said that that would be the highest that we would pay for such energy projects. We've already said that the Tidal Lagoon as it stands under the current proposals are twice the price of nuclear, so clearly we wouldn't want to be in that position. But I would add, Mr. Speaker, that I really want this project to happen if it's good value for money for the taxpayer, and my record is strong. I was the one who took TLP to meet the Special Advisers at number 10 at the very beginning in 2012, and it was from that moment on that this project was taken seriously.
Mr. Speaker, the whole of Wales is waiting for this decision, because the Tidal Lagoon is not just about Swansea. If his UK Tory government accepts Carwyn Jones's kind offer, then the Tidal Lagoons for Cardiff, for Colwyn Bay and Newport will quickly become a very real prospect, bringing jobs and prosperity to the whole of Wales, boosting our vital steel industry. This is about developing technological innovation and bringing it to the full commercial productivity. It is what we do in Wales, in stark contrast to the way in which his government has proceeded. If it should be that his government were to participate at a general election in the next few months, what exactly will the Secretary of State be able to claim as the industrial or infrastructure achievement his government has delivered for the people of Wales?
Nothing. I sort of sometimes wonder whether the Honourable Lady's questions are more in the manner of an academic thesis. But I trust they'll be published, because they're in Hansard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady has pointed to the commitment that the Welsh Government have shown of £200 million, but that is merely a small fraction of the cost of this proposal. And we're working with the Welsh Government. We've shared our financial analysis of the project, and they haven't rejected it or pushed back in relation to the sharing of that data. That demonstrates the collaborative approach that we're prepared that we want to take in relation to this project. But I would also again point out to the Honourable Lady, city and growth deals throughout every part of the Wales is a good demonstration of how the industrial strategy and the UK Government is committed to developing growth in Wales.
Mr Michael Fabricant.
Diolch yn fawr, number 3, please.
Very good, well done. Minister Stuart Andrews.
Mr Speaker, I have regular discussions with my Right Honourable Friend, the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, including how we work together to promote Wales across the globe. I recently met with key figures from our tourism sector, along with my Honourable Friend, the Minister for Tourism, to discuss the industry in Wales and the important role that the UK Government and Visit Britain has to play.
Michael Fabricant.
Whether it be the beautiful beaches of the Gower Peninsula, and I entice my honourable friend to join me on it one day, or the Clink restaurant, which of course is in the prison in Cardiff, or whether it's whitewater rafting, I could go on and on and on. But I won't. Does my honourable friend not agree that the tourism offer in South Wales will be enhanced by the removal of tolls on the Severn crossing?
Well, Mr Speaker, given my honourable friend's participation in the First Dates programme, I'm somewhat perturbed by the proposition he's given me. But anyway, I would say to him what I do agree with him is that actually the tolls will mean that Wales is open for business. It shows that we are determined to get people to come and visit the wonderful sites that are on offer in South Wales and across the country.
Fastest growing industry in Wales is tourism, and the jewel in the crown is Anglesey, severn, as the honourable gentleman will know. But many of those businesses have been helped by the European Social Fund in establishing their businesses. What, post-Brexit, does the Minister, how will that gap be filled? Because those businesses need the help of the UK Government.
Well, having been born and brought up on Anglesey, I have to agree with him that it is a wonderful place to visit. And I would say to him that actually the systems of European funding have been very complex and actually a source of frustration to businesses. But of course, as we look at the UK Prosperity Fund, we want to ensure that it is far more effective for exactly the industries that he's suggesting.
Savile Roberts.
24 areas held back by Westminster in the withdrawal bill have now, with Labour's seal of approval, increased to include state aid. Why is this government deliberately intervening to deny Wales the means to help ourselves?
Well, I would say that we are absolutely determined as a government to make sure that our exit from the EU is as smooth as possible and benefits every part of the United Kingdom. And we will be making sure that we are fighting Wales's corner in every part of Whitehall in that process.
Roberts.
Last night, of course, the Unionist parties showed their complete contempt for devolutionists by collaborating to ensure we had no longer than 18 measly minutes to debate the fate of our national democracies. Is this another attempt by Westminster to defeat what a former Prime Minister once described as the enemy within?
Well, I have the utmost respect for the Honourable Lady, but I completely disagree with her. I am a proud unionist. I'm also proud to be Welsh. And I have to say that it wasn't this side of the House that curtailed the debate. It was actually the opposition who pushed every single vote to division.
Chris Evans.
It may be a small thing, but one way of attracting tourism to Wales would be to clean up our verges and roads. There's nothing worse than coming to Wales and see rubbish strewn across the sides of the valleys. What is the government doing to speak to the Welsh Assembly and local councils to ensure they're cleaning up their roads to attract more people to come to Wales?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman is right. It's actually issues like that matter a great deal to people and give a good impression, and that is exactly why we have given more funding, fairer funding, to the Welsh Government. It means that £120 per head at the moment is my understanding.
Masterton.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Heathrow Airport is an asset for the whole of the United Kingdom, and we will make sure that the benefits of expansion are shared as widely as possible.
Masterton.
Does my right honourable friend agree that the logistics hubs are absolutely vital to ensure that places like Wales and Scotland benefit from Heathrow's expansion plans? Here.
My honourable friend is right, and I know that he is keen to gain a logistical hub in Scotland, which demonstrates that Heathrow Airport expansion is not a project just for London and the South East, but a project for the whole of the UK. And I was in Shotton just a couple of weeks ago showing Heathrow Airport as one of the potential sites for the logistical hub, so I suspect we may be in competition.
J. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree that the demand for the Heathrow rail spur link is of paramount importance now, and that the original date for implementation and opening of 2020 should be adhered to?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an important point, and public transport is an important part of the expansion of Heathrow, including the Western rail link. I'm keen to see that progressed as quickly as possible, as I'm sure as the Honourable Lady is.
Jack McPresty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the moves my honourable friend is making in actually making sure that Wales benefits from Heathrow expansion. I have a Heathrow hub in my constituency just on the other side of the Severn. But aside from removing the tolls on the Severn Bridge, which is an excellent thing to do, what else is he doing to try and strengthen economic links between the southwest of England and Wales generally?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises an extremely important point, because the removal of the Severn tolls creates a great opportunity in terms of creating and generating a new economic region. I held a Severn Growth Summit in January where more people from the southwest of England attended that was held in Wales than even those that came from Wales, which demonstrates the will in order to combine the capacity of the area in order to compete with the Northern Powerhouse, the Midlands Engine and London and the South East.
Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, Liverpool and Manchester airports serve North Wales. Will the Secretary of State ensure that those airports which want further contacts with Heathrow are not relegated behind Heathrow on the issue of service access to airports?
I think they should be. Member makes an important point, and he talked about Liverpool and Manchester, and part of the condition of the expansion of Heathrow Airport and the construction of the third runway relates to the 15% protection of slots for regional airports around the UK, and I think Liverpool and Manchester stand to benefit significantly from that.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, community transport operators provide vital services to the people of Wales. The Government has recently consulted on how to align domestic law on sections 19 and 22 permits with EU legal obligations, as well as updating existing guidance on permits. We are now analysing the responses and will respond in due course.
Jessica Morden.
As the Minister said, community transport operators in Wales would have many valuable functions, including helping isolated people get to the shops, doctors, friends and family, and be very, very hard hit by government changes being extra licensing and certification. Community transport associations say this will affect 95% of operators, so what will the Minister do with the Department of Transport to help them listen and make changes?
Well, I completely agree with the Honourable Lady that community transport operators do provide vital services, particularly in Wales, estimated 2 million passengers with 6 million journey miles. But we do have to align ourselves with the EU regulations, and that's why we're consulting widely and making sure we look at those responses in detail to ensure we come up with the right answers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be aware that community transport providers along the Welsh border also play a vital role in helping patients get to hospital and to undertake some of the school contracts. And I would encourage him to speak to his colleagues in the Ministry of Transport to ensure that these vital services will continue, irrespective of the government, the court ruling, so that we will maintain these services in rural areas.
Well, again, my honourable friend is absolutely right. These services often carry some of our most vulnerable and isolated members of our society, and that is why we are being very careful to consult widely. And I can assure him that I already have an appointment in the diary with my honourable friend, the Minister of Transport.
Chris Elmore.
Community transport has some very specific concerns, specifically in relation to having to employ a transport manager costing in excess of £35,000. That puts a real risk if these regulations go through after Department of Transport consultations. So can I ask the Minister with all sincerity to please be aware that these will have real implications if the government simply don't do anything to support community transport organisations?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I am aware of the real concerns of many of the operators. I've seen a lot of letters that have come in. As I say, there's been over 500 responses to the consultation, and 550 operators attended each of the events around the country. We'll make sure that we look at this in detail.
Order! We're listening to exchanges about the effect of Section 19 and 22 permits on community transport providers in Wales, upon which we need to hear the inquiry of the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman, the member for Rushcliffe, Mr Kenneth Clark.
Well, my honourable friend pressed his colleagues in the Department of Transport to query the legal advice that has changed the interpretation of these European community rules, and which he seems to be ultra cautious that's being given. And could we ensure that genuine community services with unpaid voluntary drivers and unpaid staff for providing services that no commercial operator would provide are not put out of business by quite unnecessary regulations and costs?
Yes, indeed, in Wales, Mr. Speaker. Well, I defer to my right honourable and learned friend's expertise in all matters legal, and I would therefore perhaps, in preparation for my meeting with the Minister of the Department for Transport, ask for his guidance and advice so that I can present a case for the people of Wales.
David T.C. Davis.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have met Monmouthshire County Councillors and share their concerns regarding air pollution around Chepstow. The abolition of the tolls on the Severn crossing represent a huge opportunity for economic growth in Chepstow and Monmouthshire, but we must be alive to those sorts of pressures too.
Davis.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for the interest he's taken in this? Will he continue to press the Welsh Labour government to fulfil their obligations by building a Chepstow bypass and showing the same commitment to clean air and a better environment as being shown by this Conservative government?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, has established a strategic roads group in Britain where we can discuss cross-border issues. A meeting was held just last week. I'm disappointed the Welsh Government weren't present, but I think it's something that we can continue to engage with on a positive basis to ensure these cross-border opportunities are exploited to the best of our ability.
Well, I'm about to say to the honourable gentleman, Ceredigion is a considerable distance from Chepstow, but I'm sure that he will construct his question in terms that make it orderly. Ben Lake.
On the question of tackling air pollution, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague Simon Thomas AM is leading the way on tackling air pollution and has proposed a Clean Air Act for Wales. But would the Secretary of State not agree that there is a case for transferring responsibility for fuel duty income so that the National Assembly has the additional resources to tackle air pollution?
Well, I think the honourable member makes an extremely important point about air quality, and that's why the government has launched its Clean Air Strategy. There have been significant improvements since 2010 in this field, but we absolutely do recognise the challenges. I'm not sure about the second element of his question, which relates to a further devolution in relation to fiscal policy.
Tammy!
9, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 9 and 13 together. I regularly discuss the role of Welsh steam plants in supporting a successful UK steel industry with my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. We remain committed to supporting the sector to remain competitive in a challenging global marketplace.
Tammy! US steel tariffs represent a major threat to the Welsh steel industry. So what is the government doing not only to get the US to see sense, but limit the threat of displaced steel being dumped in the UK and further undermining our steel industry?
The honourable member will be well aware that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has raised this directly with the President of the United States. The Secretary of State for International Trade has also raised it with his counterpart. I've spoken to the UK's Trade Commissioner in the US, as well as to the US Ambassador here in the UK. But it is only by working with the European Union on these sorts of issues that we can bring about the best pressure, and I'm confident the UK can play a leading part in those negotiations.
McInnes.
It's estimated that 100,000 tonnes of steel will be needed for the Swansea Tidal Lagoon project. So what representation has the Minister made, the Secretary of State made to his colleagues, that scrapping the project means denying the Welsh steel sector this vital opportunity?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, and we had a series of questions on this earlier whereby we said we should only want this to go ahead, and I really would like it to go ahead, but it should only go ahead if it's good value for money for the taxpayer. But the Honourable Lady points to the amount of steel that would take place, which is less than a month's output for a major steel plant. So that demonstrates it has an important procurement role, but I don't think it should be overstated either.
Susan Ellen Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 10.
Mr. Speaker, I am meeting the leaders of the Growth Board later today to discuss progress that they are making towards a deal. And last week, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, met with the CBI in North Wales to hear the members and what the business needs. I remain committed to securing a deal, but it must be a deal that delivers a step change in economic activity.
Ellen Jones.
Mr. Speaker, North Wales has a thriving voluntary sector and some excellent social enterprises. What engagement are the government ministers in the Wales office making with them?
Well, the Honourable Lady might be interested to know that I've met with every single leader of the councils in North Wales, and I had a particularly good conversation with the leader of Conwy Council about this very issue, and I'm encouraging them to involve the sector that she mentions in the growth deal bid.
Owen Smith.
Number 11, Mr. Speaker.
He approaches EU exit from a position of strength. Leaving the European Union will allow us to shape our own ambitious trade and investment opportunities in Europe and beyond, and put Wales and the wider UK at the forefront of global trade and investment opportunities.
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, 67% of Welsh exports are to the European Union. Yesterday, the ONS reported that manufacturing in our country declined by the greatest amount in the last 5 years. And Ernst & Young says that our exports are nosediving. How is Brexit going to help?
Mr. Speaker, I would say in the first instance the honourable member is calling for a second referendum. That would create the greatest uncertainty to the UK economy, both economically and constitutionally. But I would also point out, as exports from the UK are growing, they're growing at a faster rate to areas outside of the European Union. And he well knows that exports from Wales cannot be taken in isolation without considering the wider procurement and networking of businesses around the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wales and Cornwall have benefited from Objective 1 funding and the subsequent funding. Can I ask what discussions he's had on the Shared Prosperity Fund and how it's going to be allocated?
My honourable friend, Mr. Speaker, is obviously very interested in how the successor to European aid programmes works, as I am in relation to West Wales and the Valleys and Wales in general. We've committed to a UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and I think this is one of the benefits of leaving the European Union, where we can come up with a much more simplified, targeted approach that can help the poorest communities across the UK.
That's grateful. Finally, Stephen Kerr.
Number 12.
Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, and I hold regular discussions with colleagues on the promotion of Welsh exports, and I'm pleased to say these exports continue to grow. The latest figures show the value of exports from Wales, including those to destinations outside the EU, increased by more than 7% over the past year.
E-commerce gives even the smallest Welsh businesses the opportunity to get into exporting. What will his department be doing to encourage the use of e-commerce among small and medium-sized businesses in Wales?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to mention this. Indeed, a good example is Nets World Sports in Wrexham, an example of Welsh success in retail markets, with more than over 60% of its sales were in foreign markets last year, and has won numerous industries awards in recognition of its success. So there'll be more of that in the future.
Order. When the Government Chief Whip is comfortably seated, I don't want the right honourable gentleman to be discombobulated. I hope he's now happily seated. And the Junior Minister is happily seated, we hope too. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. Gareth Thomas.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow marks 1 year on from the Grenfell Tower fire. I know that members from all sides of this House will join me in saying that this unimaginable tragedy remains at the forefront of our minds. On Monday, I had the privilege to attend the very moving vigil in memory of those who were lost that night, and I was honoured to take part in an iftar with members of the local community. Let me again reassure the House that we are doing everything that we can to see that the survivors of Grenfell get the homes and support that they need, and the truth and justice that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to take this opportunity to wish the England men's football team the very best in the upcoming World Cup. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Gareth Thomas.
I, and I'm sure the whole House, will want to join the Prime Minister in her comments about the Grenfell tragedy 12 months ago. And my constituents certainly will want me to echo her good wishes to the England football team. Can I ask the Prime Minister, though, last year the top 5 cooperatives in our country paid more than 4 times the corporation tax of Amazon, Facebook, eBay, Starbucks and E.ON. The Prime Minister, I'm sure, will want to praise the patriotism of those who have signed up to the Fair Tax Mark campaign. But might this not be an opportunity to encourage the Department for Business and the Treasury to take a more proactive and supportive interest in the growth of cooperative and mutual businesses?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his comments about his constituency and the support and thoughts that they have for all those who were affected by the Grenfell Tower fire. On the issue of taxation, he may have noticed that actually HMRC has been requiring some of the large companies that he has referenced in his question to pay more tax, and has ensured that we get that tax from them. And of course they look fairly across all types of institution that operate in this country.
Mr. Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. One of the key reasons why people voted to leave the European Union was to get back control of immigration policy so that we could welcome people to our country based on their skills and their talents, not based on the country from which they are from. You can't stay in the European Economic Area, which we're debating later today, without continuing with free movement of people. So can I urge the Prime Minister to stick to our policy of leaving the single market, getting back control of our immigration policy, and not listening to the many Labour voices who want to continue with unlimited migration from the European Union?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, I absolutely agree with him. The Labour Party used to say that they wanted control of our borders. Now what they want is free movement. We will take back control of our borders.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish the England team all the best in the tournament in Russia and hope it goes really, really well. This week, Mr. Speaker, is an England win. This week is National Carers Week, Mr. Speaker, and I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to those thousands of usually unpaid carers whose commitment to family and friends too often goes unrecognised. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister pointed out, tomorrow marks 1 year on the anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. I'll be meeting families again tomorrow at their silent march. But the sad truth and reality is that many of them are still waiting for the security of a permanent home 1 year on from that disaster. Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister met President Donald Trump last week, did she do as the Foreign Secretary suggested and ask him to take over the Brexit negotiations?
have to add, Mr. Davis, you're a senior and supposedly cerebral member of the House. Well, in a leap year anyway, you must attempt to recover your composure, man. I'm worried about you, and I'm worried for you. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the Brexit negotiations, I might remind the honourable gentleman, that before December, Labour cast doubt on whether we would get a joint report agreed. We did. Before March, he cast doubt on whether we'd get an implementation period, and we did. But I wanted, Mr. Speaker, if I may, just to respond to the comment that the right honourable gentleman made about the very important subject of providing those who were the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire with permanent homes. Just so that I can make clear to the House, 203 households were in need of a new home. Every household has received an offer of temporary or permanent accommodation. 183 have accepted an offer of a permanent home. But I just wanted to say this, because it isn't just about the buildings. It's not just about the bricks and mortar of a home. People who suffered that night are having to rebuild their lives. Many of them lost somebody, members of their families with whom they had been living and making a home for years. They lost all their possessions. They lost their mementos. They lost anything that reminds them of the person they loved. When they move into that new home, they will be restarting their lives. And I wanted to pay tribute to all the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire for the strength and dignity that they have shown.
Mr. Speaker, I too pay tribute to the families for all that they've been through and all the fortitude they've shown. But sadly, the reality is that some of them have still not got a permanent home to move into. It's very important for the mental well-being of everybody. They have somewhere they can call home and they know it is their home. Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister confirmed we would leave the European Union in March 2019 and the transition would end in December 2020. But we now know the government is working on the basis that transition could continue for a further year till December 2021. Could you be clearer today? Which December are we talking about?
No, the right honourable gentleman is quite wrong in his, the way he has put this to the House, so let me be clear to the House. I think what he's trying to talk about is the backstop arrangement that we have agreed. Let's be very clear what this backstop is. This is an arrangement that will be put in place in the circumstances in which it is not possible to put the future new customs arrangement in place by the 1st of January 2021. And it is there to ensure that if those new customs arrangements are not in place, that we are able to continue on the basis that there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We are working to make sure that the future customs arrangements overall deal with the issue of ensuring no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We don't want the backstop to be necessary. We are working to ensure that we can have our future customs arrangements in place on the 1st of January 2021.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not really sure whether it's a backstop or a backslide that she's talking about here. Last week I asked the Prime Minister, and I'm sorry to bring this subject up again because it's probably quite painful for her, but when is the government's Brexit white paper going to be published? Because she did say it would be published before the June EU Council summit. Is that still the case?
No, I didn't actually say that. I said the white paper would be published, and we will be publishing it. We will be bringing ministers together. Just calm down. We will be bringing ministers together after the June Council, and the white paper will be published thereafter.
Mr. Speaker, it gets ever more confusing because at the weekend the Cabinet Office Secretary told the BBC that it would not now be until July. Can I offer a solution to her? Instead of worrying about this white paper on which the Cabinet would have to agree, how about making it a green paper in which all their disagreements are in the open and we can all make a comment on it? But if the government does not, Mr. Speaker, as looks likely, have its detailed proposals ready for the June summit, surely the Prime Minister can't be going to Brussels without anything to negotiate on. So is she going to seek a delay to that summit while the government decides what its position actually is?
Perhaps I could just help the right honourable gentleman. The June European Council is not a summit about the Brexit negotiations. There will be many issues that the European Union leaders will be discussing at the June European Summit, including the important issue of sanctions against Russia. I will be pressing to ensure that we maintain sanctions against Russia because the Minsk agreements have not been put in place, and indeed I think there are some areas where we should be enhancing that sanctions regime. He says that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, said that the White Paper would be published in July, and that's different from what I've just said. I have to say to him, after the June European Council is July. But if he wants to talk about differences of opinion, I'll tell him what division really is. It's Labour members. It's all very well the Deputy Leader pointing like that. Division is members of the Labour Party circulating instruction manuals on how to deselect all the Labour MPs sitting behind it.
Mr. Speaker, you've got to face the fact. You've got to face the fact there may now be a meltdown. Mr. Speaker, they're not actually my words, but those of the Foreign Secretary, even as his fellow cabinet ministers are preparing people for the government's negotiations, which he clearly thinks are going to end in disaster. And last week he also took aim at the Treasury, who's sitting absolutely next to him, calling them the heart of Remain. He criticised them, saying what they don't want is friction at the borders. What they don't want any disruption to the economy. So does the Prime Minister back the Foreign Secretary in wanting more friction and more disruption to the economy?
Let's talk about the positions on this issue. Labour said they wanted to do new trade deals. Labour said they wanted to do new...
Order. I want to hear both the questions and the answers. And as the record shows... Order! I don't require any assistance in this matter. As the record shows, that will always happen, however long it takes. And there's a lot of noise and much gesticulation from members on both sides of the House. But I want to hear the questions and I want to hear the answers. The Prime Minister, we're grateful.
The honourable member for Bolsover is absolutely right. We're in government, not Labour. And we've set out our position on the border. But what we see is a Labour Party that said it wanted to do trade deals and now wants to be in a customs union that will stop that. They said they wanted to control our borders and now they want free movement. They said they would respect the referendum and now they won't rule out a second referendum. And that's the difference between us. The Conservative Party in government are going to deliver on the will of the British people.
Mr. Speaker, in the parallel universe inhabited by the Foreign Secretary, you're apparently not respecting the referendum result unless you want friction at the borders and disruption of the economy. Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet is divided and they're briefing against each other. They're even whispering during Prime Minister's question time. And the Prime Minister has been left with no white paper on which to negotiate. Last week, the transition period was delayed by a year in the space of 24 hours. And yesterday, a deal with her backbenchers was reneged on within hours. Meanwhile, the economy is weakening. Industry is increasingly alarmed at the sheer ineptitude of her government. How much more damage is the Prime Minister going to do to this country before she realises the important thing is to get a deal for the people of this country, not one to appease the clashing giant egos of her cabinet?
It's the Labour Party in opposition that are trying to frustrate Brexit. It's the Labour Party that are trying to stop us getting a deal for the British people. This government will deliver on Brexit. This government will deliver a Brexit for jobs. This government will deliver a Brexit that is good for Britain. And if he wants to talk about the economy, the last Labour government left office with 500,000 more people out of work than when they went into office. What's happened under the Conservatives? We have seen nearly 500,000 more people in work just over the last year. That's Conservatives delivering on a Britain that's fit for the future. And I've heard that the Right Honourable Gentleman is trying to organise a music festival, Labour Live. I'll pass over the fact it's going to have a solidarity tent, which obviously won't have any Labour MPs within it. But I have to say to him, I don't know if all members of the House are aware of the headline act at Labour Live. The headline acts at Labour Live are the Shadow Chancellor and the Magic Numbers. Just about sums them up.
Must come to order. We must now hear a most courteous fellow, Richard Drax.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend join a growing number of her ministers who are very supportive of our bid for a one-off grant of £18 million to repair Weymouth's harbour walls and improved flood defences? This work, not my wall, Weymouth's harbour wall. Mr. Speaker, this work is essential if planning permission is to be granted to redevelop an important retail and housing area in the resort, thereby safeguarding existing jobs, creating new ones and providing more homes.
Well, can I first of all say to my honourable friend, I commend him on the work that he's done. I know he has worked hard on this whole issue of flood defences. I'm sure, however, that he will understand that ministers need to consider the various options for allocations of the fund very carefully. We need to ensure that we're getting the best possible outcomes across the whole country. And the scheme that he has referred to is on the list of projects that is being considered for the £40 million fund. It's intended to support high-risk communities, and we anticipate, I can tell him, we can anticipate that a decision will be made by summer 2018.
Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister gave a commitment that she would treat Scotland as part of a union of equals. Yet last night, she pressed ahead with a power grab in direct opposition to Scotland's elected Parliament. The Prime Minister silenced Scotland's voice, having broken constitutional convention and plunged Scotland into a constitutional crisis. Will the Prime Minister now commit to bringing forward emergency legislation so that the will of the Scottish Parliament can be heard and, more importantly, respected?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that we do expect that the outcome, and it will happen, that the outcome of the whole process of Brexit is going to be a significant increase in Holyrood's decision-making power. It is not the case that this is in any way a power grab. Over 80 areas of responsibility, of decision-making, are going to flow direct to Holyrood. Only the SNP could say that getting 80 areas where more areas where they're going to take decisions was a power grab. If he wants to be concerned about the process that this House has followed in relation to the legislation, His real question should be why it was the Labour Party who manoeuvred last night, used procedural manoeuvres to ensure that there was no debate about the amendments referred to on Scotland.
Ian Blackford!
Mr. Speaker, I really do hope that the people of Scotland listened very carefully to what the Prime Minister said, because the reality of the situation is that powers that are enshrined under the Scotland Act in 1998 are being grabbed back by this House. It is a power grab, and the MPs from Scotland were not given the courtesy of even debating it last night. It is a democratic outrage. The people of Scotland will not be disrespected by this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, under the circumstances, given the disrespect that's shown, I have got no option but to ask that this House now sits in private.
I'm not hearing that at this time, and I'm not obliged to do so, is my clear understanding. Order, the Honourable Gentleman. Order! The Right Honourable Gentleman can resume his seat. I'll happily take advice, but I don't think I'm obliged to hear that at this time. Well, what I'd say to the Right Honourable Gentleman is, I think the standing order requires that the matter be put, if it is to be put forthwith. Order. It might be for the convenience of the House for the matter to be addressed at the conclusion of Prime Minister's questions, and if the Right Honourable Gentleman, who had not signalled to me his intention to do this now, order. I'm always grateful for the moral support of the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Broxton, even when it is chunted from a sedentary position. I realise that it's done for my benefit, but I think I can handle the matter. We could have the vote now, but we could have a vote now, or it could be taken at the end. If the Honourable Gentleman wishes to indicate a desire to conduct such a vote now, so be it. Right.
I beg to move. I beg to move.
Well, my advice, I've had a mixed sequence of advice, is that order. This has not happened, but order. My view is that it is better for the vote to be conducted. My view is that it is better for the vote to be conducted at the conclusion of questions to the Prime Minister. No, I'm not. Order. I always admit of the maximum number of votes and divisions, as the Right Honourable Gentleman should know from his experience in the House, but I hope that he will trust me that I know of what I speak. There can be a division, and it will be at the end of this session, not now. That is the end of the matter. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, might I ask...
No, I'm not debating. No, resume your seat. Resume your seat. Mr. Blackford, no, you're not moving anything. Resume your seat, young man. Resume your seat. No, Mr. Blackford, resume your seat. No, resume your seat. No, resume your seat. Mr. Blackford, Order! The House will have heard very clear... Order! Please. The House will have heard very clearly my acceptance that there can be a vote on this matter. Order! Mr. Linden, I say to you, and I say it in the kindest possible spirit, don't tell me what the procedures of this House are. I'm telling you that there can be a vote at the end of this session, and not now. I'm not going to... No, Mr. Blackford, order! Under the... Trying to get under the... Just into the drawer. Order! Resume your seat, Mr. Blackford. Under the power given to me by Standing Order number 43, in light of the persistent and repeated refusal of the Right Honourable Gentleman to resume his seat when so instructed, I order the Right Honourable Gentleman to withdraw immediately from the House for order for the remainder of this days sitting. He is so in... Right, he won't. Right, well, we'll have to have the vote. Very well. Very well.
Pretend national liberation struggles.
I'm back. Order! 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 Mr. Jail Wardener! You're a very jocular fellow, but you're a little overexcitable today. Calm. Long time to go. I say order! I say only to the House, order! I say only to the House, what a pity, because there are Scottish National Party members of Parliament who had questions on the order paper. Unlucky. And as colleagues know, I always like to get to the end of the order paper. They would have had their chance, and they've lost that chance by their own choice. Mr. Luke Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the amount of people leaving, it feels like one of my after-dinner speeches. Youth unemployment in Thornbury and Yates.
Order, order. No, I recognise the House. Order. I recognise the House is in a state of some excitement. Even Mr. Hollinbrake, who's normally a model of solemnity, is looking as though Christmas has come early. But order. I beseech the House to try to resume calm, not least out of courtesy to members with questions on the paper, to whom and to whose questions we wish to listen. Luke Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Youth unemployment in Thornbury and Yates is down 23% in the last year, and scrapping stamp duty for over 80% of first-time buyers means more people in South Gloucestershire can afford a home of their own. Does the Prime Minister agree that whilst the party opposite can only offer higher taxes, fewer jobs and broken promises on student debts, this government will be focusing on providing opportunity for young people up and down this country?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I'm pleased to hear that the significant number of young people in Thornbury and Yates who now have jobs and are in work. And in fact, if we look at the figures since 2010, nationally, youth unemployment has fallen by around 141 every single day since 2010. But he's absolutely right. It's not just about ensuring young people are in jobs. It's helping them get on the housing ladder and get that home of their own. That's why we're building more homes, and that's why that cut in stamp duty has been so good for young people, enabling them to be in work and enabling them to have their own home.
Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister tell this House what actions she has taken to ensure that no further EU citizens that have been resident in this country for more than 30 years are going to be refused British citizenship like the former Mayor of Ipswich was?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I'm not aware of the particular circumstances of the former Mayor of Ipswich. What we have done, in relation to the European Union citizens who are living here in the United Kingdom as we leave the European Union, is negotiated a very good arrangements which ensure that their rights here are protected.
In congratulating the member for Harwich and North Essex upon his knighthood, and I do so with some warmth and feeling as we've known each other for 30 years, I call Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with my right honourable friend in remembering the anniversary of the Grenfell fire? Can I commend her for the way she has established the inquiry that is looking into that tragedy,
Because can I testify to her, having met victims of the Grenfell fire as she has, they are showing growing confidence that they will get the findings of that inquiry that they want to make sure that such a thing never happens again. And that is, I think, a testament to her personal courage and persistence in making sure that the inquiry was not blown off course by the understandable anger that followed the immediate tragedy.
Well, can I also add my personal congratulations to my right honourable friend on his knighthood? And can I say that I absolutely agree with him at the importance of ensuring that the inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire is able to provide the truth, to get to the answers of exactly why what happened, and to ensure that justice is provided for the victims and survivors. It is a statutory inquiry. It has the power to compel witnesses and the production of evidence. I think that is important. Anyone who is found to have misled the inquiry would face prosecution. I hope this gives confidence to the survivors and people in the local community that this is an inquiry which will indeed get to the truth.
Julie Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Ian has lifelong profound learning and physical disabilities. He's doubly incontinent, cannot wash, dress or cook for himself. He's no notion of personal safety and left unsupervised is at risk. He's able to live independently thanks to the support of his elderly mother, who is herself unwell, and by virtue of a local authority social care package. Now, Ian's PIP application that he needs to fund this care has been refused on the grounds that he can cope unaided. Does the Prime Minister agree with me? There is something very wrong with a system that punishes citizens whose only crime is to be born disabled. Will she agree to investigate on behalf of the thousands of vulnerable people who are being made to suffer?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that obviously she raised a specific case, and I'm sure she will understand I don't have the details to address that specific case, and I don't think it would be right to do so here in this chamber. What I can assure her and other members of the House are that individual cases that are raised with me in Prime Minister's questions are taken extremely seriously, and this one will be no exception. So I will ensure that the case is looked at urgently by the relevant Minister. Obviously, cases are complex, they are multifaceted, but the case will be looked at urgently.
Nadine Dorries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents have been incredibly tolerant in the face of the fiasco that has followed their commuter journey following the reorganisation of the timetables. However, added to their misery is the fact that when trains do turn up, they are incredibly overcrowded. I have written to Govia 3 times and asked them, could they please conduct a risk assessment on the safety of my passengers, my constituents, who are their passengers, as they come into London. And 3 times Govia have refused to answer me. Could the Prime Minister please use her good officers to ensure that on overcrowded trains at the moment and those suffering because of the rail delays, that our passengers are safe?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that she raises an important issue, and the experience that passengers for Govia Thameslink but also Northern have had as a result of the change in timetable and the way that was done is simply unacceptable. And it is important that they improve the services. They have plans in place. I think Govia Thameslink, for example, are introducing a new timetable that is better than the pre-May timetable, which will have 200 more planned journeys. But of course, passengers need to know, passengers want to feel that they're able to travel in trains that aren't too crowded. And certainly this is an issue that I'm sure that Govia Thameslink will be looking at very seriously. We are working, the Department of Transport is working with the company and Northern to ensure that we can provide the services that people deserve. They pay for a ticket, they book a ticket, they pay for a season ticket, they deserve to have a decent journey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The average length of time that a Stroud constituent has to wait to go to the Gloucester and Cheltenham Centre for a PIP appeal is now 41 weeks. It's 31 weeks for an ESA appeal. Now, during that period of time, constituents are now losing mobility cars and suffering enormous hardship. Will the Prime Minister promise to get a grip of this and to make sure that this hardship is not endured any longer?
Very good question.
That, of course, it's important that people are able to have their appeals heard in a timely fashion. And my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, is looking at exactly this issue to see what can be done in the tribunal system to ensure that people get a more timely result.
Mr. John Whittingdale.
Will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, Mr. Andrei Parubi, to Westminster, although I suspect he is utterly mystified by the events about 10 minutes ago. Will she take this opportunity to reaffirm the support of the UK for Ukraine, which is in the front line against Russian aggression? And does she share the concern of Ukraine, as well as Lithuania and Poland, about the strategic threat of the Nord Stream 2 Russian gas pipeline?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend that I'm very happy to reaffirm the United Kingdom's commitment and support for the Ukraine. I was very pleased only a matter of a few weeks ago to be able to have a further conversation with President Poroshenko about the support that we are able to give to the Ukraine, the work we're doing with Ukraine in the reforms that are being put through, but also, as I mentioned earlier in response to a previous question, I think it's important that the European Union maintains the sanctions on Russia because Minsk agreements have not been put in place and fully implemented, and I think we continue to need to show the Russians that we do not accept what they have done in the Ukraine.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's almost a year since the government promised its domestic violence and abuse bill, and publication of that bill will trigger a cross-party amendment with widespread support to decriminalise abortion across the whole of the UK, which is long overdue. Will the bill be published before the summer recess, and will the Prime Minister give a commitment today on the floor of the House that her MPs will have a free vote on decriminalisation?
First of all, the Honourable Lady's raised a number of aspects of this issue. The first one, I would say, is that the reason that the Domestic Violence and Abuse Bill will be published in draft first, but we have been taking our time through the consultation to work with those who are involved in working with the victims of domestic violence and abuse, to hear from the victims and survivors of domestic violence and abuse, because we want to make sure that as we bring this legislation together in this new bill, we are getting it right for people. Now, she refers to the issue of abortion. I believe that it is absolutely right that a woman should have the right to a safe and legal abortion. As regards Northern Ireland, I believe it is the best way, and my preferred way is for that decision to be taken by the elected politicians in Northern Ireland, because it is a devolved matter. As regards votes on abortion in this House, they have always been treated as conscience matters, and therefore they will be subject to a free vote.
Julia Lopez.
NICE decides whether to fund new treatments for neuroblastoma, a vicious childhood cancer which is affecting my constituent Isla Caton. Will the Prime Minister encourage NICE and drugs companies to do a deal to provide new treatments for children in Britain instead of families fundraising to receive such treatments in America?
I know my honourable friend has raised this issue on behalf of her constituents. I believe she has a constituency case which is particularly raises this particular issue. NICE is developing guidelines for the NHS on the use of dinutuximab beta, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, for the treatment of high-risk neuroblastoma. And it's not been able to recommend the drug as a clinically and cost-effective use of resources in its draft guidance, but it has consulted stakeholders on its draft recommendations. It is an ongoing NICE appraisal. It is not for government to intervene in that, but they will take all the comments that are made very obviously into account when they're making their final guidance. And I think the manufacturer of the drug is currently making the drug available to some NHS patients through a compassionate use scheme, and has agreed to continue the scheme for patients who are currently receiving treatment.
Brendan O'Hara. Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Speaker, Vernon Bogdanor called the noble Lord Hailsham's amendment that we rejected yesterday a constitutional absurdity. Whilst it is essential that this House holds the government to account and has meaningful votes on many things, Does my right honourable friend agree that it is absolutely essential that the separation of powers is observed and that in any compromise amendment it is clear that the job of the government and the job of Parliament is different?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that I'm happy to be clear about this situation. Of course, what we've seen is concerns raised about the role of Parliament in relation to the Brexit process. What I agreed yesterday is that as the bill goes back to the Lords, we would have further discussions with colleagues over those concerns, and I have agreed this morning with the Brexit Secretary that we will bring forward an amendment in the Lords. But there are a number of issues, a number of things that will guide our approach in doing so. My honourable friend is absolutely right about the separation of powers and the different role between the government and Parliament. As my right honourable friend, the Brexit Secretary, made clear yesterday in the House, a government's hand in negotiations cannot be tied by Parliament. But government must be accountable to Parliament. Government determines policy, and Parliament, then we need parliamentary support to be able to implement that policy. But the other aspect of this that I am absolutely clear on is that I cannot countenance Parliament being able to overturn the will of the British people. Parliament gave the decision to the British people voted to leave the European Union, and as Prime Minister I'm determined to deliver that.
Pete Wishart, not here. Yes. Jack Lepresti.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 15 months ago, the then Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government called in the planned expansion of the Mall at Cribbs Causeway in my constituency, a plan which represents huge economic benefit to the Bristol and South Gloucestershire area. There are 3,000 construction jobs, 3,750 permanent jobs and 150 new homes at stake in this expansion, as well as a significant amount of infrastructure investment. Now, will the Prime Minister urge the new Secretary of State to start as he means to go on and make a good decision quickly?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that obviously he's referred to the independent public inquiry, and that after that took place, my right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, called this decision in. He is considering the inspector's report. What I can say to my honourable friend is that I understand that the Secretary of State hopes to issue his decision on or before the published target date of the 2nd of August.
F. Smith.
Mr. Speaker, it took nearly 5,000 cancelled trains in just 3 weeks for the Transport Secretary to notice the Northern Rail crisis. If this government can't run our railways properly, will the Prime Minister agree with businesses, council leaders and over 25 newspapers from across the region and give Transport for the North the powers it needs to do the job?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that we have given Transport for the North unprecedented powers to influence decisions about transport investment in the North. But what's more, we've backed them up with £260 million of government funding. So it has the powers to deliver a transport strategy, which the government must formally consider, has powers to fund organisations and deliver transport projects. And those and their other powers are exactly what Transport for the North requested.
Bim Afalami.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, I know, is aware of the severe difficulties that my constituents in Hitchin and Harpenden have faced with recent delays to train services. Would the Prime Minister reassure me and my constituents that going forward the government will do everything it can to ensure that GTR and Network Rail get into shape to ensure a better quality and higher quality train service both now and into the future?
Can I say to my honourable friend that, as I said in response to the earlier question from our honourable friend, the immediate priority is to ensure that we're seeing an improvement in services for the passengers on Govia Thameslink. And that is why they have introduced a new timetable, which is not what will be the final timetable, but is better than the pre-May timetable. But what we also need to do is to ensure that they take the action so that they can bring forward that proposed new timetable, which will provide more services and better services for passengers. But in the long term, what the government is working to do is to bring train and track together so that we don't see problems like this in the future.
Chris Law, not here. All these opposition opportunities are being lost. I think that
that shouldn't continue. Chris Williamson.
The Prime Minister will be aware that schools are often targeted in war zones, and a couple of months ago I met Year 7 students from Leesbrook School in my constituency who implored me to ask the Prime Minister to sign the Safe Schools Declaration, which I understand has subsequently been signed. So my question to the Prime Minister today is, does that declaration mean that she will now veto future arms sales to brutal regimes like Saudi Arabia, which has been targeting schools as part of its military campaign in Yemen?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, the issue of the education of girls and boys in conflict zones is an important one. It was one which was addressed at the G7 summit. We have been clear as a United Kingdom government that we are providing financial support to ensure 12 years of quality education for girls, particularly in developing countries. And the G7 summit gave its commitment not only in financial terms to provide, as we contributed more, to provide for quality education, but also to focus that on those areas where there are conflict zones and where particular action needs to be taken to ensure that that education can be provided.
Very sadly, my constituent, Gina Turgill, lost her life last week, aged 95. Gina survived the Krakow ghetto, Auschwitz-Birkenau, and she became known as the Bride of Belsen when she married her liberator. Will my right honourable friend join with me in celebrating the life of Gina, who dedicated her life to informing young people about the horrors of the Holocaust and ensuring that although a light has gone out, her legacy lives?
Can I say to my honourable friend that I am happy to join him in paying tribute to Gina Turgill and to the work that she did over so many years. She was one of the first survivors to go into schools to share her story. I have seen, as I'm sure other honourable and right honourable members have, the impact that a survivor from the Holocaust going into schools and explaining what happened has on young people. It is moving, and she showed considerable determination and strength, and I think her example is truly humbling. And it's right that her legacy is going to live on in the National Holocaust Memorial and the accompanying education centre. That will be housing her testimony for generations to come. We must never forget what Gina taught us. We must fight hatred and prejudice in all its forms.
Anna McMorrin.
On her walking holidays in Wales, the Prime Minister must have seen our beautiful beaches. But plastic is killing our oceans and polluting our seas. Would the Prime Minister stay in here for a few minutes after PMQs and listen to my 10-minute rule bill on plastic pollution, support it so we can save our seas?
Can I say to the honourable lady, when I go walking in Wales, I tend to walk up and down hills rather than on the beaches, but I know that Wales has some fantastic beaches, and she's raised a very important issue about the plastic. She's raised a very important issue about marine plastic, and that is an issue which I think the UK public, as well as members across this House, have shown great energy in picking up this cause and wanting to fight against plastic waste. And indeed, the UK is going to be leading the newly formed Commonwealth Clean Oceans Alliance jointly with Vanuatu. And we're committing £61 million to fund global research and improve waste management in developing countries to tackle plastic pollution. This again was another issue that we took forward in the G7 summit as well, and got commitments in relation to dealing with plastic waste in that. And can I just say to the honourable lady, with the greatest of respect, I'm sorry, I think my diary has already been slightly changed as a result of what has been happening in the chamber today, and I will not be able to, I regret, I won't be able to sit and listen to her bill.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that those people who want to have a meaningful vote in this House, which would allow this House to vote to stay in the European Union, would be betraying the result of the referendum and show how much the Labour Party have lost touch with working class people up and down this country? And would she further agree that those people who want to take no deal from the government's negotiating hand would only incentivise the European Union not to negotiate at all in any meaningful way, and betray not only the result of the referendum but betray the best interests of the British people?
Can I I say to my honourable friend, as we go ahead with these Brexit negotiations, we are, of course, ensuring that we're making preparations for all eventualities. That is entirely right and proper for the government to do. But as I set out in response to our honourable friend earlier, what I'm also clear about is that Parliament not be allowed. I cannot countenance Parliament overturning the will of the British people. The British people were given the vote, given the choice as to whether to stay in the European Union. This Parliament gave that choice to them overwhelmingly by the vote in this Parliament. It is right that we listen to the British people and we deliver what they asked us to do, which is to leave the European Union.
Angela Crawley. Not here. Chris Evans.
For numbers of years, we used to hold a commemorative march for test veterans to commemorate their service to our country. Last week, they were in the House of Commons campaigning for a medal for their service. Will the Prime Minister look at their campaign with a view to giving them a medal for their service they give to this country?
Yeah. Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman, this is, I think, the first time that the issue he's raised with me has been raised with me, and I'll look carefully at what he's said in the House.
Giles Watling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the father of twin girls who, happily growing up in Clacton, enjoyed a very equal upbringing and education, I celebrate the announcement of the G7 supporting girls' education. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that we should support equality for women across the globe?
Yes, I'm very happy. I'm very happy to join my honourable friend in agreeing with that and in saying that there are many ways in which we can express that and put that into practice, not just in supporting girls' education, but the work in which we're doing on modern slavery, which does affect men as well as women, but we see many women from around the globe being trafficked into other countries for sexual or labour exploitation, and we are leading the fight to ensure that they have equality and are not put into that position.
Alison Mathulis. Not here. Tom Brake. Not here. Mr. Brake is here. And he's always here. And he stands every week. And he's going to be heard. Mr. Brake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The President of the CBI said today that sections of the UK car industry face extinction unless the UK stays in the EU customs union. Is there any level of damage inflicted by Brexit that will cause the Prime Minister to consider supporting a final say on the deal for the people and a chance to exit from a disastrous Brexit, something I could also put to the Leader of the Opposition?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that, as I've said many times in this House, we are looking to ensure that the future customs arrangement we have with the European Union enables us to have as frictionless trade with the European Union as possible, no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, but also enables us to have an independent trade policy and negotiate trade deals around the world. I've been clear in a number of answers in this House this afternoon that I and this government will deliver on the vote of the British people to leave the European Union. And I seem to remember that there was a time when the Liberal Democrat Party thought the people should have the choice.
Finally for today, Mr. Ian Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today marks the Princess Diana Award Stand Up to School Bullies Day. While much progress has been made, too many young people take their own lives as a result of bullying in schools. Will the Prime Minister congratulate the people at the Diana Awards for their work and recommit her government to tackling this scourge?
Can I thank my honourable friend for raising this? Can I say I'm very happy to join with him in congratulating the work of all those involved in the Diana Award and to say that this is a really important issue that he has raised. We have made progress, but as he has pointed out, too many young people are bullied in schools, and sadly that sometimes has tragic consequences. We are providing funding, £1.7 million over the next 2 years for 4 anti-bullying organisations organisations, one of which is the Diana Award. But more does need to be done, as he says, and we will continue to press hard on this issue and to work hard to eliminate this bullying.
I must just say to the House, and I'm most grateful to the Prime Minister, and before we come to points of order, that for all the turbulence and discord of today's proceedings, the little baby who has been observing them has been a model of impeccable behaviour from start to finish. And I've just been advised that the father is the honourable gentleman, the member for Norwich South. I'm not going to go so far as to say his behaviour is always impeccable, but the little baby has been impeccable. And I think we salute that, the future of our democracy and the future of our country. Yes, I'm most grateful to the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition and colleagues. And we'll take points of order. Yes, thank you, Prime Minister. And point of order, Mr. Douglas Ross.
Mr. Speaker, as he left the chamber, the leader of the SNP apparently said they will use parliamentary devices to hold this government to account. I wonder how you use parliamentary devices when you walk out of this chamber in a coordinated move. And as you will know, Mr. Speaker, I myself had submitted an urgent question on the Sewell Convention, which I hope to call ministers to the dispatch box to discuss. I am sure in your determination of that, you considered the fact that we had an SO24 application in front of us. Because the mover of that SO24 application has now left the chamber, been forced to leave in a coordinated move, and they must be lodged by 10:30 a.m. in the morning. Therefore, there is no opportunity for any Scottish member of any party to raise that now. I wonder if you can tell me how those of us who remain on these green benches, remain here representing our constituents, can address these issues, rather than those who take the pathetic, theatrical route of leaving this chamber and not representing their constituents by walking out.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I would urge that we try to lower the decibel level, and I understand the honourable gentleman feels his point keenly, and he's made it with sincerity, and he's a very assiduous chamber contributor, and I respect that. I won't myself make any personal criticism of any member. We've had what we've had, and people will make their own assessment. The honourable gentleman's surmise is, of course, correct, and I say this as much for people attending to our proceedings as people sitting in the chamber. An SO number 24 application, an application for an emergency debate under the relevant standing order, requires notice by 10:30 a.m. on a Wednesday, and I fear that the right honourable gentleman, the member for Orkney and Shetland, for example, who has expressed some interest in this matter, and I'll come to him, made no such application. Nothing new or urgent has happened since. I think we have to take things on a case-by-case and day-by-day basis. I cannot be expected to work retrospectively. The fact is, there was an application, it would have been heard. The right honourable gentleman who had made the application chose to put himself in a position in which he would not be able to persist with his application. And responsibility for that choice is that, and that alone, of the right honourable gentleman. It's not down to the honourable member for Murray, and it's not down to me. Members must take responsibility for their own actions. As to whether there will be either an urgent question on the matters of which the honourable gentleman has just treated, or indeed an SO24 application on another day, is a matter for another day. I will come to honourable gentleman, the former Shadow Secretary, say I'll take the honourable member for Orkney and Shetland first, and then the Shadow Leader of the House. Mr. Alistair Carmichael, point of order.
Grateful to you for taking my point of order, and it is in fact further to the point of order from the honourable member for Murray. As you have said, Mr Speaker, applications should normally be made by 10:30 in the morning. Now, obviously, I did not make such an application, but Standing Order 24 at subsection 4 does allow you, Mr Speaker, to consider an application if the urgency is not so known at 10:30, that is. Notice can be given as soon thereafter as is practicable. My suggestion to you, Mr Speaker, is that the urgency became apparent at the point at which the Right Honourable Member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber decided that pulling a stunt was more important than allowing Scottish members a proper debate on this subject.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and I say that with sincerity. And the Right Honourable Gentleman is an accomplished and dexterous lawyer. What I say to him, well, I think he's an accomplished fellow. He's an accomplished fellow. But what I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman is, nice try. But I'm afraid it doesn't work. And the reason why his argument, or his thesis, if I may dignify it thus, doesn't quite work, is that the matter in question, which was arguably urgent or even constituting an emergency, was the need for a debate on the Sewell Convention adherence to or violation or non-compliance with it. That was the urgent matter. The urgent matter was not the fact that there was subsequently an eruption, whether prearranged or otherwise, in the chamber. So I don't blame the Right Honourable and learned gentleman for having a go. And he wouldn't be the versatile lawyer he is if he didn't. But I'm afraid it doesn't work on this occasion. And I rather think that the genial smile on his face suggests to me that he knows that he was being a cheeky chappy. And we will have to return to these matters subsequently. I hope not at excessive length, but I will take the remaining points of order briefly. The Shadow Leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I seek your clarification, your advice on clarification about this misinformation that seems to be circulating, that the opposition didn't want to take part in the devolution debate yesterday and on the amendments. Mr Speaker, you will know that the opposition voted against the government's programme motion. Initially, we were only allocated 12 hours, but then under pressure, it was extended to 2 days. The Honourable Member for Glasgow North East made the point yesterday under a point of order and was shouted down. The Honourable Member for Darlington actually mentioned in the debate that the only voice that would be heard was the Deputy Prime Minister's. Could we seek your clarification on the fact that we did want the extra time, the opposition did want the extra time to debate the devolution amendments?
Well, I'm not sure that it's for me to interpret proceedings and to attempt to place my own construction on motivation not publicly declared. But what I would say to the Shadow Leader, which I think I can say without fear of contradiction, because it has the advantage of being true and demonstrably true, is that the opposition opposed the programme motion. I mean, that is a matter of unarguable, incontrovertible fact. There was a division on that matter, and I was notified by the opposition chief whip. Courteously, he wasn't obliged to notify me, but he did notify me in advance of an intention to oppose that motion. So it certainly shouldn't be said that the motion was bought into by or was under the ownership of the opposition. No, it was a government programme motion. And look, I've tried throughout these difficult altercations of the last 24 hours to be scrupulously fair. As I said to Scottish National Party members last night in the presence of the Minister for the Cabinet Office, the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Aylesbury, was not guilty of any procedural impropriety yesterday at all. He was entirely entitled to speak for the length of time he did in setting out the government's position, and indeed, characteristically, taking a very significant number of interventions, including from people who subsequently complained about the fact that they didn't have the chance to speak. So he was entirely in order, and the government was procedurally perfectly in order to operate as it did in the construction and submission to the vote of the programme motion. The standing order is written in that way, presumably for a reason. and it's been written, in a sense, and approved with government support. So there was nothing disorderly about that, but it certainly wasn't the opposition's programme motion, and it's abundantly clear to me that the opposition was opposed to the programme motion. I don't think I need to add anything more beyond that. Very well. Point of order, Mr Ian Murray.
Mr Speaker, I'm very grateful to have caught your eye from such an unfamiliar place in the chamber. We had lengthy points of order yesterday with regards to what the Shadow Leader of the House has just intimated, and we were looking forward to the SO24 application today so that we could represent our constituents and what are some major amendments with regards to devolution in the EU withdrawal bill. Given we now no longer have that SO24 opportunity because of the childish antics of certain members of this House from the Scottish National Party, I wonder, through you, if I could ask the Secretary of State, who's in his place, the Secretary of State for Scotland, if he would be willing to bring forward a statement in the House today, or indeed first thing tomorrow morning, so Scottish members who are here with their voice to represent their constituents can make the points about the Sewell Convention that were the basis of the SO24, so that the SNP can't gag us as well as they're gagging themselves for the people of Scotland.
Very grateful to the honourable gentleman. I would simply say to him, I don't think I need to consult the Secretary of State for Scotland on this point. That there is no possibility of a statement on that matter today, even if the Secretary of State were minded to volunteer it. I think that would, if I may say so, interfere with our proceedings in a way that a lot of members would regard as frankly unsatisfactory. And insofar as the honourable gentleman is seeking some guidance from the chair, I would say that would not be appropriate today. Tomorrow is another day. And I would simply point out, without wanting to venture further into this otherwise hazardous terrain, that even if there had been an SO24 application, and even if it had been successful, the debate wouldn't have been today, it would have been on a subsequent day. And the debate wouldn't have allowed any vote on any propositions appertaining to parts of the withdrawal bill. It would simply have been a debate on a take-note motion. Now, there could be such a debate subsequent to today. There could be. Tomorrow is another day. Let's wait to see what happens. I must apologise to the Right Honourable Member for Derby South, because I think she has an important point of order, and it hails not just from her experience as Member for Derby South, but as a former Leader of the House. Point of order, Margaret Beckett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I ask you just to confirm that under the rules of order of this House, if the Leader of the Parliamentary SNP had had his way, not only with the baby to whom you referred earlier, but every member of the public, and indeed the press, have been cleared from this House? And can you inform me, because it's not something of which I'm now sure, under present circumstances, would it also have led to the cessation of the broadcasting of this House, so that there would not have been a great loss in public scrutiny?
In the first instance, people would have had to exit the gallery, and I'm pretty certain of that. The Right Honourable Lady is quite right. The proposition was that the House do sit in private. That was the specific proposition. I don't know whether amidst the hubbub people actually heard that that was the thrust of what the Leader of the Scottish National Party was requesting, but that is the gravamen of what he was requesting, and it would have required members of the public to exit the gallery at once. And if the motion had been carried, the broadcasting of our proceedings would have had, with immediate effect, to be halted. So I think it is important that people understand the implications of some of these devices that people use. And I also add, without prejudice to any particular application, but I think on the basis that the House will believe me, and the record shows this to be true, I'm very open to urgent questions being heard in this place, and very open to Standing Order number 24 debates taking place, whether the government of the day particularly likes it or not. But I might make the judgment as Speaker that it's in the interests of the House for such a debate to take place. But of course, if people absent themselves when they have the opportunity to make these applications, they cannot then complain. And I really do think it would be a good thing if we perhaps brought to a close the operation of stunts and focused instead on the proper discharge of our responsibilities in this place. And I thank the Right Honourable Lady. Point of order, Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could you confirm that if someone is named, as happened today, they have to leave the House for the remainder of the parliamentary business, and they, I believe, also give up pay
for the day, but certainly they cannot vote in any proceedings which happen in the day. So actually the implication of what the leader of the parliamentary group in the SNP did today, apart from pull a stunt, was to make it easier for the government chief whip to get his business.
What I would say to the right honourable lady is, I hope she'll understand when I say this, I think all she needs to know, and all the House needs to know, is that the right honourable gentleman is out for the day. And you...
Tomorrow's another day.
You can't be half in and half out. You're either out of this place, in which case you can't come in and out. The fact... We're not talking about the customs union. The fact is that the member is out for the day, he cannot speak today, and he cannot vote today. And I think the position has now been made crystal clear. The right honourable gentleman, the member for West Derbyshire, Derbyshire Dales, is on his feet. Let's hear the fellow. Let's hear the fellow.
Well, further to that point of order, Mr. Speaker, I just wondered whether you were aware of a piece of paper which came into my possession just before the start of business today, which had got sort of EU withdrawal bill points of order, and it had got 8 of them written out. And it had even got sort of points of order where it said, Mr. Speaker, outrage, disappointment in 3 of them. I'm very happy, Mr. Speaker, to put this in the library so that all members can get the answer.
Well, I simply say to the right honourable gentleman, I think there will have to be quite a lot of copies. Of course I take a point of order from Mr Dennis Skinner.
Well, as a bit of an expert on being thrown out, can I just explain to you, Mr Speaker, that there are various ways of throwing people out. One is, obviously, everybody can follow. It's never happened in my case. Secondly, it is possible for somebody sent by the Speaker's office to the room upstairs which I inhabited, and he said to me, on reflection, the Speaker said you can stay. That's one difference. And the other is sometimes you are barred from the house, but not from the building. And that is another one. And these variations, I think, have got something to do with the Speaker at the time. So all I want you to explain to me is just which one is this, because it is different.
Look, I'm always open to discussing these matters with the honourable gentleman. I didn't discuss this matter with him at 7:30 in the morning because obviously the eruption hadn't happened. But we did discuss, as I toddled my way back from the health club this morning, we did discuss the question of points of order last night, and the honourable gentleman volunteered his opinions to me about that matter with his customary forthrightness, of which I was duly appreciative. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman who asks what type of exclusion was this today, the answer is the right honourable gentleman was excluded from the chamber and from the precincts of the Palace of Westminster for the remainder of the day. I think that is now clear. Now, if there are no further points of order, and I hope there are not any further points of order, colleagues, we've got a long way to go, many hours to come of chamber debate. We come now to the presentation of Bill. Mr. Frank Field.
Employment Guarantee Bill.
Second reading what day?
Many of us would like the 6th of July, Mr. Speaker.
6th of July. Thank you. And Friday the 6th of July.
Friday, the 6th of July. Yes, a very good day, the first Friday of Wimbledon. Presentation of Bill, Sir Oliver Heald.
Animal Welfare Service Animals Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 15th of June, Mr. Speaker.
Friday the 15th of June. Thank you. Order. We come now to the 10-minute rule motion. Anna McMorrin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require producers of packaging products to assume responsibility for the collecting, transportation, recycling, disposal, treatment and recovery of those products and for connected purposes. In recent years, Members of Parliament have worked hard on this issue in an attempt to safeguard our wildlife and oceans for our future generations, and I pay tribute to their efforts and grateful for colleagues across the House for their support for this bill. Packaging pollution first came to my attention over 10 years ago whilst working as an advisor to Welsh ministers in the Welsh Government. Back then, the impact that packaging and plastic pollution were having on our wildlife, natural resources and on climate change was becoming increasingly evident. And that's why in Wales we introduced the 5p charge on single-use carrier bags that since 2011 in Wales has resulted in a 71% reduction in their usage. A perfect example of the difference that can be made when a government acts. The UK government followed Wales in England 4 years later, but since their commitment to addressing the overwhelming amount of single-use and non-recyclable packaging that we use every day can at best be described as erratic. David Attenborough recently said, "Wherever I go, whether it be in the mountains, on the moors, or on the coast, there's discarded plastic everywhere." The government hasn't a clue. By the time they act, it will be too late. And only last week, tests carried out by Greenpeace found that even in the remotest parts of Antarctica, that there is contamination with microplastics. Not only is this ruining one of the most pristine environments on the planet, but the tiny shards of plastic, often less than a 20th of a millimetre wide, can be mistaken for prey for tiny marine animals. Those microplastics then make their way up the food chain, potentially inflicting harm on larger animals such as seabirds and whales, as well as getting into our food chain via shellfish. My father spent 2 years in Antarctica with the British Antarctic Survey from 1961 to 63. And I'm really proud of the pioneering work that he carried out there, and even more proud that this was recognised by the naming the McMorrin Glacier after him. Growing up, I remember many stories of life from him, of life in that vast, beautiful, untouched landscape, how the natural world shaped him. His passion for the environment and his determination to change things has stayed with me. It's unthinkable to think that our actions today are threatening those previously untouched landscapes and many others just on our doorstep. So we have now reached a crisis point. In Cardiff, clean-up volunteers described seeing piles of takeaway cartons, broken up polystyrene, and even a swan's nest made of plastic bottles on the banks of our rivers. And the founder of Cardiff Rivers Clean-up Group said, "There is a huge opportunity now. People want to make a difference, but governments just need to be stronger. Stop talking and just do it." And a recent study by Eunomia suggests that the UK government figures drastically underestimate how much plastic packaging waste Britain generates. Their analysis suggests it's 50% higher than projected, which is a staggering amount, but unsurprising, as they also analysed the composition of UK waste and found the system for calculating recycling rates is inclined to overestimate this success. Not ideal when you're using these figures to make decisions and future projections. In France, there's a proposed penalty of 50% to packaging. that's not easily separated, and therefore considerably disrupted to the recycling stream, such as coffee cups and black plastic packaging, which is problematic.
Why aren't we doing it?
But instead of just introducing a higher penalty, this government needs to address a common complaint of producers that the current system does not substantially reward and therefore encourage recyclability in product design. So a solution could be to introduce bonuses for producers via a reduction in the levy of pay. The bonuses could cover 3 categories, including reducing packaging weight of their product, making it easier to recycle, and raising awareness by having a clear and correct label applied to the product. But why is this bill so important, Mr. Speaker? Crucially, without this extended producer responsibility enshrined into law, the cost of recycling falls to councils that are already struggling to pay for social care, for education, for community services, while also being asked to pick up the tab for recycling and waste management. Currently, businesses that handle packaging are required by law to pay for recycling and recovery via compliance schemes, where the more packaging they produce, the more they pay. But between 2014 and 2016, the average revenue from that compliance was around 60 million a year. But the estimated costs of delivering those recycling services across local authorities is nearly £600 million a year. So even if local authorities benefited from the full amount, this only amounts to 10% of the costs borne by local authorities. A cheap form of compliance for producers, but one means that others pay the cost of ensuring recycling and proper disposal of its products at the end of their life cycle is absolutely necessary. As a result, research shows that half councils in the UK have had to cut budgets for collections and communications advertising for their curbside plastics recycling. So this bill aims to encourage producers to take responsibility not only for the product but also for its disposal, to be responsible for the clean-up and not just contribute to it. It aims to encourage producers to innovate and to change the packaging of their products, to contribute more to getting better recycling infrastructure for all councils where their product is consumed. And more importantly, it's what the British public are calling out for. A recent study showed that almost all 16 to 75-year-olds in the UK are concerned about this problem, plastic waste on the environment. 54% willing to buy more products made from recycled materials. But there's only so much that consumers can do if alternatives are not available. In my own constituency of Cardiff North, students in Robina Primary School have started their Kids Against Plastic Pack It In campaign, where children collecting crisps and chocolate wrappers post them back to the manufacturers with a letter asking them to switch to packaging that can be recycled. A positive campaign that gives our generation a voice. But are the producers listening? Some supermarkets are willing to play their part and listen to customers, but they can't force those independent producers to change their packaging. And manufacturers also welcome this legislation to help innovation and drive growth. That is why I'm urging the UK government to take heed, work with me on this bill and respond to the growing number of voices becoming more and more frustrated by being unable to prevent packaging pollution. The BBC's Blue Planet has had a massive impact on our psyche. Who can forget, Mr. Speaker, the image of the turtle wrapped in a plastic sack, or the photo of the stork wrapped in a plastic bag? If the UK government don't use their power to legislate properly, then these images are going to keep on coming. I commend this bill to the House.
Order. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Mary Cray, Zach Goldsmith, Ben Lake, Kerry McCarthy, John McNally, Dr Matthew Offord, Joe Platt, Liz Saville-Roberts, Mr Barry Shearman, Alex Sobel, Matt Weston and myself.
Anna McMorrin.
Packaging Extended Producer Responsibility Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 26th of October.
Friday the 26th of October. Thank you. Order. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
European Union Withdrawal Bill, further consideration of Lord's amendments.
Now.
Thank you. I remind the House that financial privilege is engaged by Lord's Amendment 3. Colleagues, we will begin with Lord's Amendment